a chair in impact investing, which I'm running with my friend Jean-Michel Severino, who some of you may know, who's the president of Investisseurs et Partenaires, which does an awful lot of impact investing in sub-Saharan Africa, and which he's the former head of the French Development Agency, so he has a very large Rolodex, as they used to say in my day. Last year's quote, there was this wonderful last year's quote from Patrick Audier, which I think is just worth remembering. This link between governments, multi-stakeholder partnerships. It's a shame we don't have a quote like that again for the conference this year. But what I just want to bring to your attention, I'm a development economist, okay, which means that I try to understand why some people are poor and some people are rich, and how we can make the poor less poor. Manifestly, my profession has failed because we still have an awful lot of poor people. In the economics profession, in the development economics profession, what is kind of surprising is that people ignored remittances for an awful long time. And the first paper which actually looked at this, I was trying to think of the sort of the intellectual history in my field, and it was this famous paper in the Journal of Political Economy by Oded and Stark, and they looked at remittances in Botswana. Okay? And that was the first paper which actually tried to understand using microdata, where they had information on people who were sending the money home and the people who were receiving it. They were the first people who actually took this seriously as economists. And that's sort of sad when you think 1985, and that's really recent. The point that I want to make, and I'm a micro person, not a macro person, but that picture over there paints an extremely striking picture, right? I mean, as a development economist, there's an awful lot of discussions about ODA, about official development assistance, FDI, but if you look at that picture, you'll see that ODA is peanuts compared to remittance flows. So in terms of, and that's in billions of dollars, right? The ODA is flat. Sure, things are changing a little bit. We have all this discussion these days, this rather sexy discussion actually about blended finance. But remittances is one of the two big enchiladas, along with FDI, and it just keeps on going up, and it's extremely robust to all sorts of cyclical shocks that we faced. Why should we be worrying about this? Well, as a development economist, some of you know the word capabilities over there. That comes from Amartya Sen. Remittances are something which enhances poor people's, not only poor people's, but individuals and households' capabilities. Then of course, there are issues on how then remittance funding ends up getting distributed within the household. That's for another day. A lot of remittances, and I've worked on a lot of remittance surveys in various developing countries, ranging from Burkina Faso, to Guinea, to Morocco. A lot of remittances to Kerala, actually, I'm working on right now. A lot of remittances goes into family businesses, but not only, right? But there's a lot of remittances which are basically earmarked for investment by poor households. There is potentially a macro effect in terms of remittances on Dutch disease. Dutch disease, for those of you who don't, there's no reason that you should know what Dutch disease is, but it's an economic term, which is basically when North Sea oil was discovered, there's an appreciation of the Dutch gulden, and therefore it penalized exports. So there may be issues in terms of Dutch disease with remittances. As a development economist, for me, that's a second order effect. The positive effects are much greater. And the final point that I just wanted to raise here is in terms of, and there's a huge database, the World Bank maintains this database, remittances, in some sense, one of the scandals of remittances is how much it costs poor people to send money back home. Okay? And now things have changed. A few years ago, one of the organizers of this session, who's not with us today, and I and another student, we worked on the cost of remittances for UPU. They were interested in how postal systems were doing this, but the cost, the iceberg cost, the shrinkage of what people actually want to send back is, in some sense, it's scandalous, and something has to be done about that. So. What's interesting today, and what I think we're going to hear about today, I'm really looking forward to hearing all the speakers, is the role, essentially, the diasporas can play in this. As a development economist, again, The issue of asymmetric information, this is something that was brought up for the first time in development by Joe Stiglitz, who some of you may know won a Nobel Prize for his efforts. So asymmetric information is something that diasporas help investors cope with. And they also have a long-term commitment. But then the question is, what is the institutional setup? And I'm not talking about democracy here, I'm an economist, right? I have nothing to say moral or ethical, but economic institutions. What are the economic institutions, the rule of law, the structures that we have to put in place to allow remittances to play their role? And there's interesting issues. I do a lot of work in health. In health, we're talking about tokenization of various kinds. Can we have some kind of remit coin? Can we tokenize remittances as well? And I'll stop there and hand it over to the people who actually know something about this issue, who are sitting over here.
They're changing the presentation.
Oh, they're changing it? Okay. Okay, can you go 2 slides back? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Christian Kikombe. I'm the managing partner of 4P Group. So derived from the Greek notions of sowing or scattering seeds, diaspora are invisible nations that reside outside their origins countries. Existing research states that immigrant remittances to developing countries serve more than basic subsistence purposes such as money for poorer relations. Okay. There's a slide missing. There's a slide missing. Okay, anyway, there's a slide missing. Sorry, the microphone, okay. So understanding the potential of immigrants and their remittances as an alternative source of venture funding in developing countries was expressed with the landmark Sustainable Development and Financing for Development. Let me quote, "We need to close the public and the private investment gap of about 2.5 trillion annually to fulfill the SDGs. Africa has realized that traditional sources of development finance, such as official development assistance and FDI, which has buoyed the continent's effort over the years, are not sustainable and can't be relied upon as main sources of financing." So in 2015, and as part of the build-up to the SDGs, that was all about reaching an agreement. So the mission of the 2016 and its subsequent years is to come up with reliable sources of financing to put this plan into action. So when it comes to domestic finance, including securitization of remittances, growing marketplace for private equity funds, this presentation will discuss to what extent the private sector, as represented by the diaspora, could be the panacea solution to the problem of insufficient public finance to achieve the SDGs. But the question then becomes how to entice the private diaspora capital to take up a large stake in the SDG financing. How to ensure some certainty of return that is commensurate with boosting inclusive growth and sustainable development, which are the core pillars of Agenda 2030. At the moment, the debate is largely dominated by the question of which and what a financing option to choose from, rather than a dilemma from a shortage of opportunities. I don't seem to be able to use this one. Do I need to point on? It's not moving, huh? Can you okay. Okay, I'll say when you have to change the slide. Sorry about that. So, so as I said, okay, move to the next slide. So. Okay, the next slide, please. Yeah. So immigrant venture through individual to individual or household to household remittances tend to be small-scale affair, more kind to microfinance transaction. Survey evidence from investment use of remittances almost certainly overlaps in some substantial part with the real estate and home improvement users. So thus, the concept of venture investment demands a shift in mindset to smaller, informally supervised and often non-separable financial flows to fund new businesses. Research explained the location of many US service offshoring facilities in India was based on the link between the dominant ethnic group in the Indian location and the ethnic background of executives in US firms making the offshoring decisions. Other research has highlighted the importance of such links in exploratory and then exploitative phases in the IT industry growth around Bangalore in India. Next slide, please. The next slide. Yeah. Okay. So diaspora remittances are the largest source of social funding in many African countries. It should be stated up front, following on from what Professor Khan showed in his presentation, that data limitation on social investment, particularly in areas of philanthropy, venture philanthropy and corporate sustainability programs across the African region is substantial. Africa has accessible data on investment by corporate social investors, angels, and local philanthropists like family offices and foundations. The same is not available at a central place and updated on an annual basis for some other categories. That being said, the potential for diaspora funds in financing development challenges remains largely untapped across East, South, and Western African regions. However, diaspora bonds have been leveraged in East-West Africa bonds to raise funds, although at a limited extent. If you take the case of East Africa, Kenya has issued a diaspora green bond to facilitate investment into the big four agenda areas, such as investment into affordable housing, healthcare facilities, such as cancer centers, and agro-business. Rwanda launched a 50 million Remit Plus Rwanda diaspora bond in 2019 to provide affordable housing for the Rwandese population. In West Africa, Nigeria raised its first diaspora fund, a total of 300 million for the investment of infrastructure, whereas Ghana was targeting to raise $3 billion for economic development, especially for infrastructure as well as agriculture, tourism, and so on. Next slide, please. So in recent years have seen the introduction of diaspora bonds to fund large development projects. What if impact capital could be sourced from the more than 140,000 high net worth individuals who live on the African continent and structured in similar ways? Or how about streamlining and accelerating diaspora remittances? For example, the US Africa Development Foundation has established a new partnership with the National Basketball Players Association Foundation to accelerate investment back to Africa by diaspora professionals in the US and to increase social and economic impact for communities still struggling to address some of the basic human needs. The next slide. The next slide. Okay. The evolution and growth witnessed in the industry in the last decade has been driven by key trends summarized in this table. Diaspora remittances in West African region remain primarily unstructured. West African countries have been developing innovative structures to leverage diaspora funds. Next slide. The diaspora remittances in the region remains primarily unstructured, as I said, indicating a large untapped potential for raising development finance. And remittances are of great significance to most West African countries. In the West African regions received more than $34 billion in remittances from its citizens living abroad, which was more than a 50% growth from 2008. And on average, 75% of the remittances in the regions is allocated to Nigeria, which is followed by Ghana and Senegal that get 7% and 6% respectively. Next slide. So, for example, when it comes to the establishment of innovative structures for raising diaspora funds, the West African countries have been leveraging diaspora bonds to raise funds to solve these development challenges. In Nigeria and Ghana have witnessed moderate activities and moderate number of players in the area. As I said, however, what we have seen as well is that the COVID pandemic have had a significant implications for the number of international remittances going back to the African continent. Next slide. The diaspora is also a vital source for funding for a wide range of social and developmental initiatives in the East African region. In East Africa, countries received a total of $17 billion from its citizens living abroad. Kenya accounted for 62% of this amount, and other significant beneficiaries in the same period was Uganda, South Sudan, Tanzania. Yeah, this one is working better. Okay, well, let's try. Okay, maybe it's a slide. Okay. So remittances, either as direct diaspora investment or as portfolio diaspora investment from Kenya's diaspora in the US, represent $15 to $60 million in impact investing opportunity. The enabling environment in both countries is conducive to promoting investment and transfer of funds. The high transaction costs and the lack of organization among the diaspora represents challenges. The Kenyan diaspora is scattered across many parts of the US. However, diaspora concentration is leading to cost reduction, information discovery, productivity enhancement, which could well enhance an individual migrant's capacity to discover venture opportunities back home. The geographic proximity and the information sharing it promotes almost certainly decrease the transaction cost of discovery. Without geographical proximity abroad, immigrant remittances have no significant impact on venture capital back home. Research has found that diaspora concentration is magnifies the venture investment impact of remittances from immigrants residing abroad. And also remitting immigrants seem less concerned about institutional shortcomings back home compared to venture capital funds or private equity investors. The venture investment use of remittances probably depends less on formal and more informal investor protection, and potential solutions include, for example, direct investment. Next, oh, that's myself. Okay, it's working, great. Oh, that's fine. So, for example, when it comes to blockchains, in the United States, there's 13 states that have no transmission laws or have Bitcoin-friendly guidance. While these states have no money transmission laws, they all recommend registering with the federal government. And recently, Kenya passed some regulation on e-money, which is electronic or magnified stored, issued against a receipt of currency of Kenya or any other currency authorized by the central bank, and accepted as a means of payment by persons other than the issuer. Virtual currency fall into a gray area, as they do not fit the strict definition of e-money under Kenyan law. Movement Capital, formerly known as HomeString, is the leading crowdfunding investment platform for emerging market. And Movement Capital democratizes access to unique investment opportunity in emerging markets, bringing extraordinary deals within the reach of the retail investor. And Movement Capital began with a small idea and a big mission to facilitate African diaspora investment and make a difference back home. And with the support of more than 5,000 members, they have raised 25 million of investment scattered across 35 deals across 13 countries. So with the launch of the Movement Capital, they hope that to take their mission to the 250 million diasporan globally and include a broader community of people keen to invest with purpose, passion, and for profit in the emerging markets. Their experienced team coordinated with a wide network of leading institutional investors to source disruptive and transformative investment opportunity in dynamic markets. One of the investments that they had in their portfolio is Bridge International Academies, which is an education education tech company. This is the largest chain of private nursery and private school, providing high quality, affordable education to families earning less than $2 a day. So vehicles used to mobilize diaspora wealth via capital market include the deposit account, the securitization of remittances flows, transnational loans, diaspora bonds, diaspora mutual funds, debt issues, diaspora private equity fund, and mechanisms to mobilize savings of institutional investors. And one example is BitPesa, which was started by raising 1.5 million to ease Bitcoin transfer from the UK to Africa. And according to the CEO of BitPesa, the company aims to building Africa's first and largest digital currency payment hub. This is done by using Bitcoin for remittances in Kenya and Tanzania, allowing users from anywhere to send Bitcoins to BitPesa. And BitPesa then converts it into M-Pesa, which loads it into the receiver's M-Pesa account. Such a system helps M-Pesa users getting money quickly and efficiently with only a 3% fee, significantly cheaper than the traditional transfer methods. And given the success of combining the M-Pesa and the Bitcoin in Kenya and Tanzania, BitPesa is significantly disrupting the money transfer market in East Africa region. Voilà. That's over to you, Andrea. Yeah, over to you.
Let's wait for the presentation to come. Yeah. Yeah, that's yours. That was the program.
All right, thank you, and welcome to everyone in the room. My name is Henry Modafe. I am CEO and founder of Abroad. As the name suggests, is a platform for the African diaspora and friends. That's why we didn't call it some African name Abroad, so it's Abroad. So what I'll be doing today is taking you through what we call a use case. You've heard the narrative around remittances and how remittances can sort of help with the transformation of Africa. And what you have here is a project that's actually doing that in reality, and I hope when we have conversations later, we can go a bit into depth as to what we really do. So as the tagline suggests, profit with purpose. I know these days when you are in impact sessions, you don't talk about profit, but we're starting from there. Now, the reason is what we're doing is something quite practical, and we don't really believe in just telling stories with no impact. We can say that because I'm diaspora. I've lived now in Switzerland for more than 30 years. I go to Nigeria, the country where I come from, quite frequently, so I know what I'm talking about. I'm one of them. All right, so who is the African diaspora? Practically, I will tell you, we're talking of all the Africans who live outside of their original country, within Africa, or in the other parts of the world. And I know when you talk to some people and you talk of Africa, they talk of countries still, which is actually quite amusing at times. But we're talking about 53 or 54 countries, depending on how you count. So we're telling you about people who have left their countries and are in some economic activities in some place of the world and can contribute back home. Now, what we see and what really makes us sad as the diaspora from Africa, including myself, is when you turn on the TV, unfortunately, still in 2022, the story of Africa has not changed. It's still poverty, it's still corruption. If there is problem in Ukraine, it affects Africa directly because suddenly there is no grain, there is no bread on the street, and all of that. That has been the story of Africa. Now, for those of you who actually know anything about Africa, you would wonder why that is the case, because actually Africa has got a lot of resources, we all say, right? A lot of mineral resources. Actually, 60% of the arable land for cultivation in the world currently is in Africa. But Africans are starving when, you know, there is no food coming from Ukraine. So we look at that as the African diaspora, and we wonder how come a continent that's so gifted naturally is still the poorest. Something must be wrong. And being a banker myself, we've done a lot of finger pointing. We've waited a lot for multilateral agencies and international bodies to come solve the problems of Africa. And unfortunately, it's better late than never. We've come to the realization that we need to take the bull by the horn and that Africans have to do it themselves. So if there's one thing you take out of this conversation, it is that we have realized we've got to be the one to drive this change and this revolution for the transformation of Africa. Now, why do we say this? I can tell you something for sure. If it was possible for multilateral agencies to change Africa, they would have done it by now. They've been there since the 60s. If it was possible for African governments to do it, they would have done it by now. They don't have the resources. Corruption is an issue. And then you have all the international politics, which hinders them from doing what they want to do. So when we look at all the different stakeholders, we think the only group that might have a fair chance of transforming Africa is the African diaspora for three key reasons. One of them is we are amongst you. So some of us have the same education, that people in the West have. We work in the same organizations. We have the same skill set. So why can't we do in Africa what we're doing here? So we have the skill set and the knowledge to transform Africa. Two, we've got the capital to do it. And actually, that was one of the biggest, conclusions we drew from our survey, that as Africans, we don't really need to wait for anyone to transform Africa. We've got the capital, we've got the know-how, and we've got what it takes to do it, okay? And if you look at the numbers that Christian shared before, he took out Nigeria because that will skew the whole map, right? Africans, or Nigerians specifically, send anywhere between 25 and 27 billion home every year as remittances. And I can tell you, in reality, when I send money home, it's not because I want my dad or my mom or my sister to invest in any business. It's because they've called me, the kid has not gone to school, somebody's in the hospital or something. It's never investment. It's really give back in some forms, charity. All right? So if Nigerians in diaspora send 25, 27 billion home as charity, we got thinking and we're like, couldn't we do better than that? Okay? Now, if you look at all of Africa, the number, depending on the statistics you look at, is anywhere around 100 billion per year going into Africa. Egypt is actually as big as Nigeria as well, in the 20s of billions every year. So if Africans in diaspora, talking 54 countries, are able to give charity to Africa of 100 billion every year, we asked ourselves the question, can they actually do more? And we did a survey with Africans in diaspora, taking a subset, and we talked to the Nigerians, a group survey. And what came out of that got us thinking. So when we talk to Nigerians and say, every time you send $1, how many dollars more do you have that you could potentially send to transform Africa? And the average number we got was 100, which makes a lot of sense. It's human nature, right? If I'm going to give you $1, I have somewhere, right? So if you look at what they own, take averages here, it's like they could do 100 times. And then the second part of that survey is, why are you not doing more? Like, if I give 1% of my $100 as charity, that's already quite doing a lot, right? So this was the thinking. So we followed that trend of thought, and we came to conclusions talking to Africans in diaspora. And they said if they had, value-yielding activities that they could put their funds into, they would be willing to consider to give more. So the average we drew was that every African in diaspora, if they could make some returns on their money, would actually do 10x what they currently do. So this is why we started with profit with purpose. So Africans in diaspora, they would give $1 for charity, but if you show them where to invest, where they can actually make some things back for themselves, they're willing to put in $10. So when I look at that with Nigerians, I got thinking, I'm like, you're telling me Nigerians potentially could put in $250 billion into the Nigerian economy? That's mind-boggling. If they could get their returns back, all right? Now we can debate, what is acceptable returns for that kind of investment. But I like what Christian said before, okay, that if Africans are shown where to put the money, we've got the money. We've got the capital. So where are the ideas? And these are some of the challenges we started digging into. Why are Africans not investing? Where are the products to invest into? Who is doing the vetting in terms of risk management of those products? How easy is it for an African like me to invest in Africa? 54 countries. It's already difficult enough to invest in Europe. So how can I invest in 54 countries in Africa with information that is skewed or almost no information and all the risk that is associated with a lot of these countries? So those are the challenges that need to be tackled. It's not a capital problem. It's how we package opportunities and offer them to the Africans in diaspora to invest into. So we thought that was a good proposition. And, to get me off my bed, I thought this had better be meaty. So if Nigerians can do 50 billion, I'm like, okay, in 10 years, what could we do if we started a project? And we said, let's take a round number. What if we can bring in $1 trillion into Africa over the next 10 years through the Africans in diaspora? And I'm like, now you're talking. Now it's time to start a project. And we called it Abroad. Profit with Purpose. So what have we done? Our goal is to raise $1 trillion over 10 years for the African economy. As big as Nigeria is with more than 200 million persons, what the federal government of Nigeria gets from selling crude that we're all killing ourselves about is about 40 to 70 billion a year. That's what we're spending. So if the diaspora alone can give that country 250 billion, I would think the government should be doing everything possible to package opportunities for the Nigerian diaspora. Something that come up before is very difficult to organize this group of people. It used to be. It is no longer very difficult because these people, they're chatting on Facebook, on Instagram, or whatever. We've just got to think differently as to how to bring these people together and work with them. So Abroad is a platform for the African diaspora to invest back, and I choose my word very carefully, invest back into Africa. So we have looked at the opportunity and we say, how do we package that most? So we came up with 3 services for the African diaspora. One of them is the Diaspora Direct Investment, which is run on our investment platform. Now, simply what we do is we go straight to opportunities like farming. So we're thinking inclusion here. We're thinking impact. We're like, where can we have the immediate impact for the African diaspora? So agriculture is a low-hanging fruit. 60% of arable land in the world. Shortage of food in Africa. Why not tackle that? So we started with agriculture, and we look at projects, and we help raise finance directly that goes into farms. So we did a proof of concept, when we check this with, Africans, at times we talk a lot, and they say, yeah, great idea. We say, okay, prove that you would really invest if you have these opportunities. So we had a proof of concept, using Excel and Word and all that. We got about 150 Africans together, and we said, okay, let's see what you can do. In 10 days, we raised more than €1 million and invested in a farm. I'm like, something is happening here. So these guys are actually putting their money where their mouth is. And they say, you go build a platform that's comfortable, that I can do it on my phone, and I can see my investment, I can see how you are managing the risk, and we are willing to invest in Africa. So what is driving all of these persons? You mentioned it. The way we look at risk as Africans is completely different from a VC, from a Swiss bank, or from some investment agency. Because for us, this is home. And we know this place is better. So if you're talking about a farm in Benin City, where I come from, I can tell you exactly where it is. And a lot of the things we consider as risks for an African, we're like, okay, it's risk, but yes, so what? I would take the risk, especially if I know this is my way of helping to transform Africa. I had a very interesting experience last year. I visited Nigeria, and a friend introduced me to a company that was doing crowdfunding in Nigeria. And I saw people were making 30% returns in like a year. I'm like, gee, and we were doing negative interest in Switzerland. And I would be stupid to leave my money in a bank here. I did farming. That's how I got into farming myself. And in a year, if I make 30% okay, profit, but the purpose of it is that some smallholder farmer got money to do their farms. Now their kids can go to school, they can grow their businesses and all that. I'm happy, they are happy. That's the definition of success. So the second thing we did is, you can invest, but there has to be a platform. And in the day of technology, what else do you do? Mobile apps, right? So we have your mobile app now. We are building a digital bank, or what you call a neobank, like a Revolut. And we're going to give all the Africans in diaspora an IBAN and a bank account. So when they receive their salaries, they can transfer $100 into their investment account and choose themselves the farm, the crop that they want to invest in. And they see in real time, you know, the money is invested directly with the proprietor of that farm. When the crop matures, some crop take 3 months. When the crop matures, they get their money back. Now think of expanding that kind of a model into healthcare, into microinsurance, into funding education. That is stuff we do today for, you know, Swiss organizations. Why can't we do it for Africa? We have the know-how. So that's why we brought a team of Africans who've worked in all these different areas. Like, let's do something for Africa. It's good business. We help Africans in diaspora, don't forget that, to make money. And why is that important? We're talking of baby boomers. Soon we'll also have the immigrants who have been sending 25 billion home in the next 20 years. They are getting of age, like some of us are getting gray. And not a lot of us have thought about pension. Some think when the day comes, we just take their bags and go back to Africa. But Africa has moved on, right? So we're challenging them to say, what are you doing in terms of pension planning? If you want to go back to Africa, what are you going back to? What's waiting for you there? And all those kind of ideas are flowing into the digital bank. And of course, remittance as a service. It should be free, really, because, you know, it's a digital world. Why should I pay 3%, or actually it's 9% on the average now for just sending bytes to some other computer across the world, right? But yeah, you know, Western Union, MoneyGram, they offered a good service years back. They made a lot of money. But right now, these things are free in Europe. So why should the poorest people in the world pay to send money? So they can continue their business, but if I help Africans make money on my platform, I don't think they're going to withdraw it and go to Western Union to go and send it and pay 9% when they can send it on my platform for free, right? So that's where we offer them remittance services. And there are companies like Flutterwave, you hit your button, the money is there. And if you do it by crypto, it's almost negligible. But we've gone beyond that. We say instead of making it for free, just collect maybe 3% of the remittance fee, put it in a fund and fund infrastructure which is owned by the African diaspora. Why can't we own airports? Why can't we own a diaspora airline, for example, and fly better, where we are not treated like unwanted customers? So those are some of the things that are driving some of the innovation that we're doing. And at some point, we said the ultimate would be if we had an African marketplace. Most Africans now, if they want anything like, you know, houses or an apartment in Lagos, you have to go find it. But if we had a platform where you have it, and we can help with those transactions on a simple interface on your phone, I think that's going to be a very, very interesting proposition and a good business opportunity. And that would help grow the economy in health, in infrastructure, in housing, definitely in education, and the primary sector like agriculture. So it's a very, very interesting opportunity for us. We are excited as African diaspora to be contributing. We, you know, we see the excitement when we explain what we are doing to the diaspora, and it's not just talk like we normally do. We already have our app. We go live in less than 10 days with our app. We already have our in-house group that already did the POC, so they are waiting. Actually, so when can we go again, you know? Once this concept is mature and ripe, give us 3 months, 6 months, and we prove that we have the right risk, the right investment and portfolio management and all that, I think this is going to be the way to go to actually give Africans in diaspora an opportunity to benefit from the opportunities in Africa, which we don't right now. Others are making the money in Africa, we're sitting here, and we have what it takes to participate in that economy while helping to transform the place. So I think I will pause at this point. I don't know, I think my time is up. So Andrea, you come next. maybe let me do my team this favor. So it's not just me, that's the team behind, sorry, voila. So that's the team that we've put together that's running this wonderful project on behalf of the diaspora. And some of them, at least 2 of them are here as well. So thank you for the input. Thank you.
So hello, I am Andrea Monti. I am the director of the Global Impact and Sustainability Accelerator for the Founder Institute, which is a US-based organization. We have a global outreach. We do select and accelerate startups in many industries. Of course, each of them has got a focus on the SDGs, one or more of the SDGs. Now, I believe that the presentation from abroad illustrated how technology can be used for a better use of funds and a more productive use of funds. And of course, this happens in a market, in an ecosystem, which is the fintech one, which has seen in the last 10 to 15 years a boom, of course. You've seen that many companies have catalyzed investments from all over the world, in Switzerland, but also in Europe and US. So also, I mean, those innovations are forcing or leading or helping fees to go down. These, together with some safer regulations, is helping to unleash additional funds, more funds. So we've seen the trend in the first presentation from Professor Sarakand, and we don't have any specific way of thinking that this could be reverted in the short term. Consider that on top of that, of course, there's been the pandemic, which also played an important role. So now we would like to, we have a couple of questions around the theme of remittances, and actually we feel that the remittance itself as a topic is really intriguing, because we can see now the intertwine with cryptocurrencies, and especially we're wondering if cryptocurrencies could be accretive to remittances rather than substituting part of the flows that are happening today. And the other point is, if there is a way we can make a better use of remittances to leverage investments, and I believe we have seen a few options. I would go deeper, meaning that most of the investments now are in either real estate or agriculture. I'm more, as I've told you, more on the venture space, so I'm more on the venture capital space, and would be exploring if there is a direct consequence to that. So starting from the first topic, we've been saying that cryptocurrencies are estimated to represent a very minimal part of the volume of remittances. I've seen estimates in the order of 1% from Reuters. Maybe it is a too low estimate, but we're talking about a few percentage points for sure. And this is mainly because a number of reasons. Of course, receiving cash is still the norm. There is still little or no possibility then to pay for goods and services digitally for many people receiving that. And there are few obstacles to a wide adoption of cryptocurrencies. For sure, I mean, still receiving cash is cheaper, faster, and easier alternative, mainly for the fact, not mainly, but also for the fact that you need to go through a conversion to local currency when you receive a digital asset. Then there is the volatility effect, of course. I mean, many of those currencies could be much more volatile than local currencies. And of course, I mean, when you are waiting for money for your basic support in living, healthcare, etc., you don't want to experiment any volatility on that. Lastly, but not less important, still we are far in many countries in having a clear pathway to legal framework or pathways for cryptocurrencies, and this even in the United States, for example, which is should be one of the most advanced to that extent. So, can cryptocurrency be a substitute for remittances for now? Well, I believe, but happy to see this in the panel. I believe that unless we have a better opportunity to use digital currencies into physical location, it will be very difficult. So what could happen is that part of those remittances could be transferred or transformed into investments, but I do see more likely that we could start with new flows, new infrastructure, new services to channel investments, not only in real estate, in agriculture, and all those things that we are partially doing now, but also in enterprises, in venture capital, and private equity. Now, as I said, I mean, the theme of remittances is strictly intertwined, or at least, I mean, I like to see it intertwined from my perspective with entrepreneurship. And there is a flourishing number of VCs looking into diaspora founders or immigrant founders. And that's because of the personal traits we will explore in a few minutes, and also because we have a number of amazing references of companies founded by immigrants or son of immigrants. So this is from the Fortune 500, and as you can see, I mean, many big brands there. In general, looking at startups, there are studies that say that 55% or more than half of the startups of the unicorns have been built by immigrants. And if we go down by a level, so immigrants or children of immigrants, this percentage goes up to 64%. So we're talking about 2/3 of unicorns in the US. Looking at UK, closer to us, the scenario is not much different, because even if just 14% of the residents are foreign-born, half of the UK fastest-growing businesses have been founded by an immigrant, or they have an immigrant co-founder. So there is still a strong presence of it. Of course, you could ask why this is, and I believe partially we've seen that in the presentation from abroad. So trying to depict or highlight some of the personal traits of the immigrant founders, and happy to have these also, to have your feedback, Harry, later on. Of course, I mean, there is a high level of hunger and commitment to succeed, which is a bit more than the average of people being already in their country. I would say, and personally, I have to say, I've traveled a bit, I've also experienced that. There is a general lack of intimacy with all the boundaries, laws, and regulations of the country you are in. So you're more brave, more bold. It could be maybe more frequent that you do something just because you don't know all the different laws and boundaries you could find in that country. There is, of course, another emotional aspect that having moved from one country to another one, you have already left your comfort zone. So starting an enterprise is less scary than if you were in your country with your family and in your city. People that left and went to different countries, they could have experienced many different and more evolved ecosystems. So it also means that they've got more benchmarks in terms of what works, what doesn't work. So rather than having stayed in the original country. So again, they could have more examples to learn from. There is also an economic reason. Many founders, they do source resources from the original countries, which usually are maybe they've got a lower level of wages, or they've got suppliers which they do know better than the country where they're in. So there is this dual model when you maybe have the market company or a market legal entity in US or in Europe, and then you have another company which is a productive company in some of the original countries, and then you can supply services from the original country to the market country, which could be, again, US, Europe, or whatever. So, but when we say, okay, we are talking about diaspora, and we would like maybe to nurture more diaspora investments, there are a few considerations to be made, a few complexities which we should look into. Starting from the term itself and the fact that we should segment it a bit more, because diaspora is a kind of catch-all term, but in fact we do have multiple kind of flows from different continents. We have, of course, the theme of migrations, of refugees, of different kind of reason for which a person leave his original country. So we would need to deep dive a bit on that. Another consideration is if we should consider remittances investment, potential investment, or already a return on investment, because some of those people maybe left to start a new business or to find a better job, and they are returning back part of the income they're generating. So some would argue that this is actually already kind of return on investment, which doesn't need to be reinvested. Then there are different generations which could have different attitude, because again, we're talking about diaspora as a catch-all term, but in fact we have maybe people from the early 90s or early 2000s which might have a very different attitude than people younger. And the same is true for the way they are seeing themselves in the country they are in. So how much are they willing to just look in the future and what they are building, rather than thinking also at the past, so their origins. Again, different countries and different origins might imply different attitudes in these. So what could we do to foster additional investments? And again, namely, I'm looking at entrepreneurship. So I believe we should try to nurture better collaboration among the three main partners in the ecosystem, three main actors in the ecosystem. We have a lot of successful immigrant founders, and we need them to act as a role model to attracting capital from VCs and private equities, but mainly VCs at this stage. VCs and private equities, they are not, in my opinion, getting enough funds from institutional investors with this specific team. There are a few examples I can make of diaspora investors, diaspora funds. Most of them are privately funded, so not a lot of funds coming from institutional investor. And of course, you need something in between. So you need incubators, accelerators, operators, which could help in bridging the gap and the concepts between different countries, different continents, and mostly supporting ventures once they've been invested. This is it.
Thank you, all of you. We are now reaching the second part of our conference, where there is a discussion that will be moderated by Christian. I think now it's clear to you how remittances can be used as a bridge. Like I think here you have many different options, and Henry through abroad has shown different possibilities, whether you belong to the diaspora itself or you belong to the friends of this diaspora. The floor is to Christian.
Okay, thank you very much, Remy, and thank you to the speakers. So, as you've seen today, in today's session has brought together leading experts, leading practitioners to discuss the key issues laid out in the first part of the event on how to use potential diaspora for promoting innovation and entrepreneurship in emerging markets. So the second part, as Remy said, of the panel discussion will be guided by a couple of questions. I will be raising a couple of questions for each of the presenters. And then I will allow two online discussions to make very brief reactions to what they've heard during the first part. And after those interventions, I will open up the floor for Q&A for the people here in the room. And I don't know, Remy, if you're able to collect questions from the audience online. If that's possible, Remy will be raising those questions on the virtual audience behalf. And at the end of today's session, Professor Jean-Louis Acron will conclude and say a few things about what's next. And finally, we have reserved the boardroom just next door, where stakeholders in the room who would want to express an interest in what you've heard today, particularly from the abroad side, can meet with the entire broad team that came down from Zug today and who are leaving tonight. So, so do take advantage of that. Okay, so yesterday, some of you might have heard the CEO of Ghana's Impact Promotion Agency. He talked about Africa's challenges should be considered as opportunities. And we in Switzerland need to change the narration about Africa away from the risk perception towards a rising continent with many opportunities, given the fact that it's a population of more than 1.4 billion inhabitants. But the financing has always been a problem in terms of luring investors to Africa, despite the fact that Africa is boasting the highest average return on investment, and yet Africa is still just receiving a minuscule part of the world's foreign direct investment. So before I raise my questions to the panelists, I would want to give Johan Franzen, the CEO of the Entrepreneurship platform, an opportunity to react to what he have heard and tell the audience how his platform can facilitate some of the issues we have discussed today. Yeah, he's on Zoom.
I don't believe that you have the details.
So.
I didn't have the details. They should have the details from the
Yes,
Maybe.
yeah. Okay, maybe can you give me his? I can put it up so we can put it up. Okay, Johan. We can't see you, but we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, hello everybody.
So very nice to get an invitation here. I appreciated this very much, and I definitely agree that the remittances and Africa is a very, very important aspect. I think a core element, here I am even. I think a key element is really building the trust. So to set the context also for this, I think we're all lacking the trust to a large extent in the digital platforms today. So that is one big element which I think needs to be addressed. I think another one is the fact that we're all pretty overwhelmed by the many, many different tools out there that delivers small elements, but not in a coherent way. And I think also there's a lot of duplication happening in the world today. So those are three aspects that actually Entnest is working very hard at fixing for the entrepreneurship ecosystem on a global scale. Entnest is a digital infrastructure for the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And I appreciate very much the work together with Christian here to deliver higher trust. Entnest is an invitation only. It's delivering an all-in-one platform for productivity, and it's really a network for the synergies across these different platforms. So my question would basically be to you guys, how do you see us becoming better at the digital trust element in order to submit the remittances and so on? Is there something that you guys are working on to improve the trust in the system in order for the diaspora and the ecosystem to feel that they believe that the money that they invest will go to the right elements for further progress and innovation, which takes the world forward? And if you want to connect with me, of course, you can find me in the Building Bridges app, Johan Franzen, and I will send you an invitation to the Entnest platform. And Christian, of course, can do the same, and you can also reach him there. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Really, really interesting and exciting points that has been made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Johan. I don't know if we have Eric Guichard from Home Capital. Can you see if there's anyone else on? No. Okay, if he's not there, if he comes, let me know. So we heard from Henry earlier that it's precisely on this background that we need to leverage diaspora to promote innovation. So Henry, given the risk wariness expressed by many of the Swiss investors attending Building Bridges, what is the due diligence process which a diaspora-led organization such as Abroad is using to look for projects or places to invest within the African continent? And what policies have been deployed in the ECOWAS region, for example, where Nigeria is based, to improve the contribution of the diaspora to innovative development that you are aware of?
Hello? Okay, I guess you can hear me. All right, fantastic. I would like to, thanks first of all for that contribution. I think that's quite valuable. I would like to differentiate, first of all, the two topics, because when it comes to remittances, I don't see any trust issue. because we've been sending money through Western Union and MoneyGram since decades, and you send the next minute is there. Even on World Remit, you hit the button, you know, the money hits. So there's no trust issue there. It's been taken care of by technology. But I guess the question is directed more towards, you know, the investment part of things, because, you know, when you invest money, it takes time for that to mature and all that. It's quite interesting you mentioned that point, because when we were trying to, at the beginning of our project, one of the names we played with was Trust Chain, because we thought trust was at the heart of the issue. Most of us, we've lost money, to be quite candid, investing in Africa, you know, all kinds of opportunities that we try to go into, and then people just make away with your funds. But having said that, though, I think going alone as a diaspora to try and do something back in Africa can be very risky, because then it's very emotionally driven. It's some brother or some uncle, and that's already a recipe for disaster. So what we have done with abroad, we try and mitigate that a bit, because in our case, for example, one, we source projects from 54 countries. That takes an enormous amount of resource and planning, and you don't just go and say you now want to do something in you know, Madagascar, if you've not been there before, right? So it means there is a filtering and a sourcing process. Two, we don't just jump into every industry where we have no clue, for example. We would go to industries where at least in-house there is some know-how that we can fall back on. So if you look at all these different filters, including the fact that to invest in an opportunity, we have, for example, an independent investment committee that would look at that project the way any bank would do. Okay, so you look at it, we have our criteria for selection, and not just risk criteria, also sustainability criteria, if you're talking about agriculture, impact criteria as well. So we look at all of that, and you have a pool of projects from which you select. And then a final step is, unlike funds and all that, we don't invest money on behalf of the diaspora. We give them a menu of opportunities. They read all the materials, the term sheet, and they choose. And what we've seen is a lot of them would take a project that's close to home, that they know. And what we're seeing more and more with discussions we're having with our diaspora ambassadors is they are beginning to actually suggest projects. And we have a case where a group of diaspora, you know, from one of the neighboring countries to Nigeria have come together, put together a project, and they say, you help us structure it, and we would bring our community to invest in it. Because they realize that if they do it amongst themselves, other things crop up, you know, religion, what tribe are you, all that stuff. So they give it to a neutral party. So trust is very, very important, and trust has to be earned. So there is a time element, which was why I said, you know, give or take 3 to 6 months, by the time we can prove initially that is working, people are getting their cash back, the systems are transparent, then you get, you know, more people coming in. And don't forget, one of the advantages we have, of course, in our case, is that, you know, we're a European entity, so there are regulators for crowdfunding. If you have a neobank, it's their bank account. They invest, they get, so all that is in place from a process viewpoint, and as long as we can make that transparent and make sure the platform is secure, it should, over time, give everyone the comfort once they've tried that, okay, this is properly done and works well for everyone. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Henry. So while the large-scale immigration of skilled people, and recent data has actually shown that the percentage of African diaspora in the US with a bachelor's degree is much higher than the local population, that can reduce innovation and economic dynamism of countries of origins, but the diaspora that arises from sustained migration may turn into assets. So channeling and increasing trade and investment, and perhaps most importantly, entrepreneurship, linkages, and knowledge spillovers is all essential for promoting and sustaining innovation for sustainable development. So Andrea Monti, as someone who has been working for many years in the market enabling space, and recently you joined the Founders Institute as an executive director, On this background, how do you see perceive? How do you perceive can be the role of incubators in remittances senders as well as receiving countries? And can you make some concrete examples of investors in the diaspora?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, Christian. Well, as I said, I believe that incubators and accelerators need to be the oil between the need for investment and the opportunity for target companies to be invested. What I'm seeing now is that there is a lot of interest from mainly US people, US investors, to look into those immigrant founders, but it is mainly limited to Europe. People from Ukraine, they of course they're famous for being great software developers, and in US now, of course, there is a kind of lack of software developers at a reasonable price. So they're trying to get advance of those, maybe edging in cost, and mainly so companies in US and Canada are investing either in immigrants for Europe, or even companies in UK are investing in immigrant founders from Europe. So one is Blue Lake Venture Capital, Diaspora Venture is another one in US, One Way Venture is another one. What I see is missing is something like a systemic approach in having a more global platform, trying to get the best of the founders all over the world and a decent amount of funds going into them. Because all of those initiatives are not small, but in any case, they're mostly private again. So we cannot really hit big numbers. The other point is that usually those VCs, they are immigrant themselves. So they are, of course, investing in something they know. I recall what you said before about Africa, Henry. So I know Africa is my home, so I can invest there. Okay, but what about someone who is not immigrant, starting investing seriously in people from other countries? This is something I believe still we miss, something we should create.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. So, Professor Akon, do you think that remittances flow will remain stable, and has the pandemic pushed remittances to a plateau? And secondly, why do remittances seem to be disconnected to the macroeconomic growth so far? And do you believe that the diaspora investment can change that?
If I had a crystal ball, I actually wouldn't even tell you what I know, but I'd make money with it. But there we go. I'm not sure that, why should it plateau, right? There's no reason that it should plateau. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. One point that I'd like to stress in response to your question, and also what was said today, lack of capital is not the problem in Africa. There is lots of capital. If lack of capital were the problem, the SDGs, which, by the way, I don't believe in as an academic, because that's no way to manage a development process with 169 indicators. You want to run a corporation with 169 different indicators? No business could function. So of course the development community can't properly function. But anyway, that's another story. But I'm no manager. I'm an academic, right? But you don't run your company with 169 different indicators. You probably have like 3-4 different indicators, right? But so two things. One, the diaspora is incredibly important. I'm born in the Cameroon. I may not look like it, but I'm born in southern Cameroon near the border with Gabon and Equatorial Guinea. And out of the 54 countries in Africa, I've lived, worked, or visited 47 of them. So I feel very African. The trust issue, that I think is the key to harnessing the diaspora. Let me just give you one very specific and simple example, small scale example. So let me go to Francophone Africa so that there's not the imperialism of the Anglophone Africa here. Let me take Senegal, country I love. Okay? If you belong to the Murid community, which is a brotherhood, in Dakar, you need a loan, you pick up your cell phone, you call your second or third or fourth cousin in New York City, and within 2 hours, you have your loan. That's trust functioning. The problem is how to harness that level of trust within a very close-knit community, such as the Murid. How do you get that and commercialize it in some sense and harness it at a larger scale? You know, how do you bring that to scale from something which is really small? So personally, I mean, as a development economist, and this is the last thing I'll say, as a development economist, I wouldn't continue working on Africa if I weren't, and this is what I spend most of my time doing, and I've been doing it for 30 years, if I weren't upbeat. Maybe I'm just stupid, right? And so I just continue working on Africa because the solutions, and what Henry was saying, right? IFIs have never pulled any country out of poverty, right? I mean, the World Bank, the IMF, UNCTAD, and all these organizations weren't around for American development or British development, et cetera, right? And so why is it going to be any different today? People pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. And there's no reason that Africa shouldn't be able to do this.
Great. We are running a little bit behind schedule, so I had said initially that I was going to ask 2 questions before I give the opportunity to floor to ask questions. I think we can maybe go ahead with that, and then if time, I can ask more questions. So.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was very interesting presentation from all of you. And my question would go to Professor Arcand. And let me take you a little bit to the Eastern Europe, especially to Georgia, where I'm coming from. So, and we see like in 2021, amount of remittances amounted 13% of the GDP, like it exceeded by far to the FDIs. So, like, while 46% of the Georgians who received remittances, they were saying as a only breadwinner person who would send the remittances. So, which indicates like for the households, remittances are like incredibly important. So, and plus that, OECD indicates that people who receive remittances are more likely to repay debts. So that's also something which indicates the unsustainability of the Georgian financial system. But my question is that out of all these remittances that Georgian people receive are like a very tiny percent invested, and most of them are consumed, as well as Georgian economy has its like a consumption nature, consuming nature anyway, so however it is. So, and my question is that regardless that government has attempted to change somehow institutionally, we see actually zero change. As a development economist, like what would you say, like from even maybe from the private sector, how can we drive this massive amount of money and important for the development of the country to be invested more sustainably and to not go to the black hole of the consumption? Thank you.
Let me attempt to be brief. So let me give one word to you first: fungibility. Just because people say that they take the remittances and it goes into consumption, money is fungible. Okay, so that's the first thing. Okay, so you can't follow a dollar once it arrives in someone's pocket, whether it's investment or consumption. You don't know that it's just that it's earmarked. Money is fungible. That's the first thing. The second thing is there's nothing wrong about remittances basically being an insurance mechanism. And to a large degree, they are an insurance mechanism. And as any investor knows, if you want to engage in investment, you have to have some kind of insurance mechanism, whether it's formal or informal, and remittances often function as an insurance mechanism. So I think that sort of the aggregate numbers that you're looking at, which are absolutely true, I'm sure, okay, and I don't know the numbers for Georgia, but I think that underestimates in some sense probably the economic impact that those remittances are having, because they're freeing up other resources. Now, then, the enabling environment and the institutions, the economic institutions that I was mentioning, and as an academic, I mean, go and read the stuff by Daron Acemoglu, who's this very famous professor at MIT, who basically shows that development, the most important thing are institutions or economic institutions. That's what explains development. It's not resources, et cetera. It's institutions, right? I mean, Switzerland was a poor agrarian country, landlocked. Okay? Poor agrarian landlocked. That's the description of sort of basket cases in sub-Saharan Africa, but it also applies to Switzerland, right? Or to Austria. So anyway, the point I wanted to make is sometimes what your eyes tell you or what people tell you, right, that it's going into consumption, that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't provide a huge contribution to investment by freeing up other funds.
Thank you. I actually have less of a question, but more a remark, and that goes to the panel which I've been discussing. There's a company in Zug called Idonic, idonic.io. It's been live since last year. They're for profit. They tokenize remittances and tokenize also other aid, let's say, and have been transferring value and money into African countries, Middle Eastern countries, and also now with Ukraine response in Eastern Europe. So you asked the question, Professor, is tokenization possible? It's already being done. Money is being transferred at a fraction of the cost already. And we're powering projects, because I'm involved in that company, in Tanzania, Uganda, South Sudan, and other countries. So it's already live. It is tokenized. It's not based on Bitcoin. And so there's no proof of work energy problem. It's based on Stellar blockchain. And the last comment I will say is that they're looking for a Series A funding. We can talk about it after. But it's done. It's live.
Sorry, what was your name again and organization?
Alco is my name.
Okay.
Alco Fioli. And this is a company, one of the ventures I'm involved in. I'm in a couple of ventures. Idonic is the company. And it is a fantastic story. Can just recommend you to have a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the panelists. It's a really interesting topic. So my name is Michelle Choi, and I currently work in San Francisco for blockchain crypto companies. So this is very much on point. And I'm currently studying on kind of just the financial inclusions, and Sub-Saharan Africa have been the biggest adopters of crypto, by and large. Kenya and Nigeria being the main adopters because of the international remittances. So this is very much like key and on point. And I'm just wondering, given that you can kind of build on this trend, a lot of people adopting crypto is using the P2P platform, so not decentralized, but the decentralized like Paxful or local Bitcoin. So now with kind of some of the sub-Saharan African countries issuing their own CBDC, like the ENERA, I'm wondering if abroad can kind of leverage off of that and accept kind of crypto or digital currency within your digital platforms from your diaspora, and actually kind of converse or have a partnership with the government to actually be able to convert that into the ENERA, and that is offering like efficient transfer of remittances and also allows you to kind of spread the wealth, as you will, to kind of important projects. And then, as you mentioned, to tokenize that to kind of impactful investments maybe, and then you can actually trace and be non-fungible. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Actually, you just wrote one of our use cases. When we started our project, we're actually doing both crypto and fiat. And for regulatory reasons, we had to split it. So we have a second project that's exactly same thing, but completely crypto. And we can do the inter-exchangeability behind the scenes, but you know, with crypto on that platform, you can invest, you can remit, you can have debit cards and all of that. So that's something we're doing. Now, we do realize in the case of Nigeria that there was no use case behind the OCBDC. It's been done, nothing is happening with it. I've talked to some of the people, I'm sorry, they don't seem to have an idea what to do with it. I think digital cash, particularly for Africa, has huge potentials. Nigeria has just also issued licenses to mobile companies, so mobile cash is coming as well. Now, bringing all of this together is going to be a very, very interesting opportunity that would help, you know, in transforming the financial ecosystem and inclusion and all that will come. So it's something we're working on as we speak, and happy to exchange later.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Christophe Plas, and I just have one question. I was wondering if you are considering to develop some new currency or exchange system, which is not necessarily convertible with or dependent on conventional national currency, either on, for example, the peer-to-peer exchange system, exchange market, sorry, that you talk about in the case of abroad, and also either maybe use remittance to fund or finance these currency development projects. I'll just give you an example. Grassroots economics in Eastern Africa have been developing either like Bangla Pesa, which is a low-tech paper currency, but also like Sarafu Network, which is based on high-tech cryptocurrency. So I was wondering if you're also considering this kind of innovation with this digital financial technology. Thank you.
One of the things I didn't mention is the fact that our platform is to a large extent tokenized. But you know, the whole crypto topic, depending on where you measure it, can raise all kinds of things. So our platform is tokenized, and 25% of it is owned by the African diaspora. It's their business. So as they do transactions on the platform, they earn our tokens, and those tokens, and you heard it here, they are going to be gold-backed. So we have a project to actually digitalize gold because of the whole issue of fluctuation. And what we're looking at doing is, you know, there's the whole DeFi and staking and all that with cryptos on cryptos and all that, you know, which, like we saw in the last 3 months, you know, can be very challenging. And we want to bring some of our products on the DeFi platform where you can actually stake on farms and not just on some bubbles, stuff like that. So at the end of the day, the ideas are not new. I've been a banker for 30 years. It's a savings account that pays you interest, whether you call it staking or not. You know, there are some slight differences, but it's the same mechanism behind them. So whether you stake, you know, some token on Bitcoin or whatever, you can stake on a farm. We'll pay you the returns as well, like the guy who is giving, you know, dollars to invest in a farm. So we need to be innovative and creative in a way that people understand what we're trying to do. But the biggest challenge we've faced is, you know, in Switzerland here, the one canton that accepts Bitcoin for taxes, the bank of that canton will not open an account for you if you say you're a crypto company. So that's the reality. So you then got to be smart and say, okay, this is crypto, this is fiat. You architect, that brings in complexity, but at the end of the day, maybe it's fine, you know, so you have two different businesses we interpret behind the scenes, and yeah.
Okay, in the interest of time, I would just like to say on behalf of 4IP Group, it's been a real pleasure to be working with Broad since the beginning of this year. As some of you might know, we were working together and for submitting a grant proposal for the new initiative by SECO and Swiss Development Corporation that was announced yesterday. Unfortunately, we didn't make the list, but I still think this is an amazing product and solution that they are offering. So before I hand over to Remy and Jean-Louis Comte to conclude, let me just let you know that the team from abroad came down from Zug, so they're available to meet with you for half an hour before we go downstairs. For any of you who has an interest in what we're doing or what they're doing. And in terms of discussing marketing, engagement, education of the diaspora investors, how to access investment opportunity in Africa, or even how to leverage existing technologies such as the crowdfunding and the blockchain. So please join us at the boardroom afterwards if you would want to exchange with the abroad team that are based in London and in Zug in northern Switzerland. So Remy, over to you.
Yeah, so just to wrap up a bit quickly, I think, again, there is this bridge. There is a bridge on the financial perspective, also on the economic, academic understanding. I think we always try to bridge what's micro and macro, and remittances can really end up on the meso level. So far, it's used either on a really macroeconomic perspective, where we compare with development aid, where we compare also with foreign direct investment, etc. While when we use survey data with individual or households, it's really hard to make the bridge between these two, entrepreneurship and the global macroeconomic productivity. While here, if there is this market that is created for SMEs that are funded through diaspora investment, we can really see how it can bridge things at a global level. Now, just in terms of logistics, because we are about to finish, that is the close of the sessions for the day. There is a cocktail in the village for those who would like to stay and continue networking. And today, for those who may be interested, there is a National Geographic documentary screening in room B starting tonight at 6 p.m. So that's about that. And if anyone wants to say something, I think it can be quickly done.
So we've heard three really interesting presentations which, to take the word you were using, intertwined diasporas, remittances, and cryptocurrencies. And it was sort of, what was cool about it is that we had three completely different perspectives, sort of more in the weeds, and I say that actually I like weeds, more high-level view, and more dragnet, just the facts, ma'am, right, in terms of the numbers. Let me just end by telling you a story. One thing we didn't talk about today is we're talking in some sense about transplanting these institutional models and these ways of thinking from what has been done in Western countries and transplanting them sometimes to Africa. What I think we should also think of is taking the institutions that are created also on the ground in Africa. So the story, which is very short, is Benin, not your Benin, the country, not Benin City. In Benin, so I have friends who work in Benin, and there are huge social pressures in Africa when you get remittances or when you get any kind of money to help a whole bunch of people, right? So one possibility is you just sort of hide this money from people, and there have been lots of experiments, that economists, my tribe, has carried out in order to understand this. What people quite often do in Benin is, suppose they have a project that they want to finance. They have the equity to do it. They will take out a loan at a high interest rate. You know why they'll do it? Because then they can show their friends and the myriads of cousins who come asking them for money. They can say, look, I have this repayment this month. Okay? So this is incredibly inefficient. It's an incredibly inefficient use of capital, right? But it's created, it's generated by the social pressures. So what I'm saying here is that there's all sorts of interesting social structures and social pressures which sometimes are for the bad in terms of the efficiency of the use of capital in Africa. Family structures are actually a drag in some sense on efficiency. The incentive structure is skewed by the necessities, the social necessity that you have to help your extended family. And so one of the things that I think the industry has to do is also find a way to harness those social structures, in some sense to do a little bit of anthropology. And the anthropology can only be done by African entrepreneurs themselves in the field, and we have a lot of stuff to learn from them, actually. And I'll stop with that.
Thank you very much.